Welcome to EVONA Origin Stories, the space podcast where we look to bring you extraordinary leaders from within the sector and their fascinating stories of early life, career, and how they broke into the space industry.
This is episode 6. Our guest today represents an unconventional route into the industry and aligns perfectly with our global mission of making space accessible for everyone. From being an outdoors kid and sports enthusiast in Colorado to serving his country in the US Air Force, where he was awarded the Jabara Award for saving the lives of 41 US troops, all before excelling in the financial world of Wall Street. Blazing a trail from 2017, where he co-founded Space for Humanity, the world's first sponsored citizen astronaut program, before he went on to co-found Voyager Space Holdings in 2019, a business of which has successfully acquired 6 commercial space companies. As you can probably hear, he's an incredibly ambitious guy who has successfully collided the world of business and space exploration. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Matthew J. Kuta. Good morning. Hi, Matt.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. Yourself?
Good.
Good.
Been busy.
Yeah, good. I've just been catching up with Dan Garrissey. I haven't spoken to him for a while. We usually make sure we connect sort of once a month, but I think we've both just been so busy recently. We haven't had a chance to catch up. So I had a good chat with him earlier. Good to catch up with him again.
Good. Yeah, he's always keeping busy.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, look, thanks for taking the time to do this and being a part of our show today. We really appreciate your time.
No, of course. It looks like I can't see your video, but I think everything else looks like it's logged in. So
good. All good. Well, if it's okay with you, we'll kind of dive right into it, if that's okay.
Great.
Good. Well, look, again, thanks for taking the time. I think for us, it would be good to start with the early days of Matt Kuta. Talk us through where you sort of started in life, grew up, school, college, and be interested to know sort of how you found your way into your early career and US Air Force.
Yeah, I'm from Colorado, so I'm mostly a kind of a mountain sort of guy. Grew up here in the Denver area, and growing up, I did lots of different sports, football and baseball and basketball and track, and I used to read the newspaper, which, back when in-paper newspapers were in vogue. And I would, like middle school, high school, I'd read the sports section of the newspaper. And, there was the rest of the newspaper, and usually I would just kind of discard it. But one time I was just kind of flipping through the main part of the paper, and I saw this article, I think it was from Motorola, talking about satellites. And I remember reading through it, and that's really the first time where I was like, wow, like satellites and space and communications and all these different things. And I remember I wrote on a little piece of paper that when I grow up, I wanted to fly satellites. And, of all the little pieces of artwork I did as a child, it's all been discarded, I'm sure by my parents. But for some reason, my mom kept that one note of anything else. There's nothing like today displayed in their house besides that one little note that is in a frame that says, that I wrote, back when I was in whatever, 9-10 years old, saying that when I grew up, I wanted to fly satellites. Little did I know flying satellites is not the proper terminology, but I was interested in space and aviation and aerospace kind of all growing up. I was the young boy that had the pictures of fighter jets in his bedroom hung up on the walls as the posters. I think I probably watched Top Gun about 100 times. It was back when we had the VHS cassette recordings, and my parents recorded the Top Gun on TV one day, and I think I just watched it over and over, like 100 times probably. And so that kind of all culminated in my interest in aviation. And in high school, I was getting ready to graduate, and no one in my family had ever gone to a normal 4-year university. My father ended up getting his GED, and my mom graduated from high school, and that was really it. Even in the extended family, my dad went back eventually to night school and got his bachelor's degree. And so I didn't really come from a college pedigree, if you will. So initially I was going to go to Alaska and be a crab fisherman. This was before The Deadliest Catch was a TV show.
Yeah.
And I was going to go up and be a greenhorn up there. And my thought is I could go crab fishing for a season, make decent amount of money, and then come back to Colorado and pay, maybe 2/3 of my in-state tuition, and then work my way through the rest of college. And then my dad was like, who was previously in the Air Force, enlisted, as was my grandfather back in the Korean War. And my dad's like, well, have you considered going to the Air Force Academy? And I was like, well, what's that? I just thought it was like a military base with a football team. I didn't know there was like an actual college, even though I live, 45 minutes away. And so he explained it to me. He's like, yeah, sure. I applied. So it's the only school I applied to. I applied to the Air Force Academy, or I was going to go be a crab fisherman. And I ended up getting a congressional nomination from a gentleman named Tom Tancredo at the time. And applied and got in. And next thing I know, I was at the academy as a cadet. And then I remember I showed up in boot camp, and the first day they're, of course they're yelling at everybody, and they're like, why do you want to be here? Like, what do you want to do? And, like, what do you want to do when you finish this? If you can even get there, puke. And everyone's like, I want to be a pilot. And I had no idea that so many pilots went to the Air Force Academy or came out of the Air Force Academy, because my vision was 2600. I couldn't see anything. I was literally like almost like legally blind. And like they come to me and they ask what I want to do. And I knew I couldn't fly because I couldn't see.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, I just want to serve my country, sir. And it was like wheels start turning. Like that was the right answer, but that I wasn't supposed to say. So then I ended up doing some push-ups before that because of that. And then, spent 4 years at the academy. And then out of that, I was on the skydiving team, which really got me interested in aviation. So I jumped into like the Fiesta Bowl, Denver Bronco football games, baseball games, things like that. And then ended up getting a slot out of there to go to flight school. So, yeah.
Nice. Thanks for that. I love that Top Gun inspired. And by the way, they need to bring that movie out. It keeps getting pushed back because of COVID, as in the new Top Gun movie.
I know. I'm excited.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're in the US Air Force, how does the transition happen, the pivot from that into the space industry? How did you end up in the space industry from the US Air Force?
Yeah. Well, so when I went to flight school, I ended up getting selected to be a fighter pilot. So I flew a plane called the F-15E Strike Eagle. It does air-to-air combat, air-to-ground combat. So shoot down other planes with missiles, drop bombs on ground targets. Supersonic, I think its top speed is about Mach 2.5. And it was kind of, I think, something like of the, give or take 600 astronauts or something out of NASA or around the world, something like 40 or 50 of them have all graduated from the Air Force Academy. And the vast majority of them were fighter pilots, because a lot of them went on to go to test pilot school, and then they would eventually go on to be like the commander of the space shuttle or whatever, or of the ISS. And so it was just kind of always around culturally. Like every year, the test pilot school applications would come out, the application window, and there would always be a couple of folks in the squadron that would apply. Some of the guys that I actually wrote a letter of recommendation for one of my guys that reported to me, and he ended up getting accepted to go to test pilot school. So it was kind of always part of a potential path to get into space, more involved in space. And then as a fighter pilot, you're kind of at the user end of a lot of space-based assets. So GPS navigation, we had GPS radios, so we would actually leverage GPS constellation with certain crypto, where we could talk to anyone on planet Earth from our F-15 as long as they also had a GPS, radio. GPS guided munitions, so GPS guided bombs, imagery, satellite derived imagery that we would then use for navigation or for targeting. We would use GPS, certain aspects of GPS to target or to track targets. So I was able to always kind of use a lot of space-based assets, although I wasn't operating them. They kind of plugged into the cockpit of the jet and our missions. So I was always very interested in that. So it was always something I was just generally interested in and, enjoyed. But I also was not an engineer. I have a Bachelor of Science degree from the Air Force Academy, and I took, probably, I don't know how many credit hours, but a whole bunch of engineering and advanced math classes. But my degree is in foreign area studies, more like kind of like an economics degree of foreign, regions, essentially. And so I was always more interested in the business side of things versus the engineering side of things. So when I left the military, I wanted to learn more about the business of business, if you will. And I went to business school at Duke for another only school I applied to. I'm 2 for 2. I went to Duke Business School, and then I found my way into private equity and investment banking, and eventually ended up getting a job that I accepted at Goldman Sachs at their global headquarters in New York City to be on the private equity investment team, which is great because you kind of learn how value creation works and how companies grow and how money flows from investor bases and pension funds through into companies and then back out again. How to value companies and assets and capabilities. So it was kind of learning that skill set of the business of business and valuation. And then after a couple of years, I wanted to kind of connect the dots and leverage kind of my background as aerospace, national security. As a military officer, I led a lot of people. And then in Wall Street, finance and business, and kind of fuse them together, and it kind of out popped Voyager Space, essentially. And Dylan Taylor, who's the other founder of Voyager, he and I are the two founders of the company. He and I had been friends for, I don't know, 6 or 7 or 5 or 6, 7 years before we started Voyager. And we both kind of started talking about an idea that did not have a name yet. And we eventually kind of left our day jobs and started Voyager, and the rest is history. So, yeah.
Amazing. And I guess now that you've been in the space industry for a few years now and seeing how much it's developed both upstream and downstream, what is it that sort of stands out for you about the space sector now that you're kind of in it and you're living it and breathing it? What do you love most about the space industry?
I think the thing that I enjoy the most is the people in the industry, to be honest. I mean, the technology is cool, right? I mean, it's, of course, that's exquisite tech and doing all very exciting things. But the people that are involved in the space industry, they're not all in it just for the money. They're in it because they truly believe that the space sector is a tool to help make the world better here on Earth and up in space as well. But and they're very passionate about the space sector. They're like, a lot of them are like real believers, and they love space, and it's just something that they're more, I guess I can use the word passionate, versus if you're in a different industry that's maybe more established or has less of that kind of that big picture vision, like exploration, adventure part of an industry. It's just more of a, hey, I just go to work just to clip a coupon and get a paycheck. So that's probably what I enjoy the most about the industry.
Absolutely. And that whole thing around people and connecting and the passion, everything else, is that kind of leads me on to the next thing I want to talk around with the Space for Humanity initiative as well. So outside of Voyager, I think from a distance, we've really admired the work that you and Dylan have done for Space for Humanity initiative. And it seems there's quite a lot of alignment there in sort of the global messaging, if you like, between Voyager and us and Space for Humanity. And it's about making space accessible for everyone. Everyday civilians have the opportunity to go to space. So we'd like to know sort of how that idea started, where it sort of came from, and what drives your passion to kind of enable everyday citizens the opportunity to travel to space one day.
Right. That's a good question. I mean, it's if you want to, Voyager is for profit, we're a business, but if you kind of want to know what the heart and soul of Voyager is, I would look at Space for Humanity, and they're all, they're all connected from a philosophical standpoint. They just have different objectives, and with Space for Humanity, I was talking to Dylan, and Dylan's the founder of Space for Humanity. He had this idea out of the Aspen Institute that we should find a way to democratize space. Something like 85% of all astronauts come from Western countries, and 89% are males. So how do we make space accessible to everybody? Which is not easy, and it'll take a long time. But how do we do that? Because you're probably familiar with Frank White, great human being. He coined the term overview effect, and it's a known psychological shift that happens when you see the Earth from the outside in. The curvature of the Earth, there's no borders, there's no ethnicities, there's no religions, there's no anything. It's just, you just look down, it's just Mother Earth. It's fragile and it's special. And so how do we get more people to have that shift in perspective, so when they then come back to Earth, they can be a change agent within their local communities, but they didn't have to be a high-flying NASA astronaut or a PhD in astrophysics from an Ivy League university. They could be someone from Bangalore with no formal education, but has started up a local space initiative in their local community and love space, and they want to be able to make change within their little sphere. So Dell and I were talking about Space for Humanity. This was like 2015, 2016. And it was this idea that was in his head, and we talked about it for about 30 seconds and moved on. And it really resonated with me from some of my time as a fighter pilot in combat. You really get a perspective on how fragile life can be. So the next time we chatted, I had kind of made up this kind of 2 or 3 year timeline, or like an action plan. How do we get from this idea that's literally just swirling around in our heads to action? And we talked about it, and we're like, yeah, this sounds good, so let's do it. So no kidding. I mean, I remember I bought How to Start a Nonprofit for Dummies. No kidding. And I went over to Dylan's house and sat in his basement. I opened up this book, and we just figured out, okay, how do we make a nonprofit? Like articles of incorporation and bylaws. And then I made the first website on PowerPoint, and Dylan and I were going back and forth as we were doing our day jobs. This wasn't our full-time job, and kind of making some edits. And I found some real low-cost web developer that we paid like $5,000 to make the first website. And we did our launch party. We had formally announced in 2017 in San Francisco, and it was just Dylan and I, and we were at a space conference, and we just announced it, and that was it. And we just kind of kept building and building. And now, I mean, we have a partnership. We received some donations from Blue Origin and Virgin Galactic, and we're selecting our citizen astronauts. And it's really starting to gain momentum. Rachel Lyons, who's the executive director now, she's a rock star, and she's doing great work to grow it and build it. And it's really gaining an international following. And we hope to be able to put our first citizen astronauts up in space here, pretty soon.
Unbelievable. I love the fact that you and Dylan built something so profound that has a global impact as a side project. That's pretty incredible.
Yeah. Well, it's taken a lot of folks a lot of time and effort. So Rachel's doing a great job.
Excellent. Well, next thing I want to talk about is kind of a mixture of things around failures and achievements, really. I think, in the modern day, especially with things like, Instagram, Twitter, these kind of social media platforms, people always kind of see the highlight reel of successes and achievements and kind of like the end product of that. But they don't really see the work that goes into it, the grind, the sacrifices that kind of lead up to that success. So over your career, what would you consider so far as your biggest failure, and what did you learn from that failure?
Yeah, I've had a lot of failures. I mean, maybe one or two failures. I actually almost failed out of flight school as an in the Air Force. I failed. We have these things called check rides. They're evaluation flights, and you can fail three. You can fail two, and if you fail three, you basically get kicked out. And things were going very well, and I was in T-38, which is kind of like it's like a supersonic fighter trainer, and I failed my first two check rides for things that were nothing flying related. I failed one for on the ground. We would do mock emergency procedures where we'd kind of have to talk through what we would do and they evaluate us. I failed one for that. And then I failed one because we had all these big binders of publications and we had to keep them up to date. And I missed one of the updates. I did not, literally 4 letters, acronym in the margin. I did not write that in. I failed. And I got to so I failed 2, and then I got to this other check ride, and I passed that one by barely. And then, but the next thing I know, I didn't fail anything else after that, and I went off and I ended up flying the F-15 and did great. And the thing I really learned from that is details matter. I didn't fail any of my check rides for flying, for stick and rudder. Flying always came fairly easy to me, but that's not the only thing that matters. Attention to detail, being detail oriented. Getting kicked out of flight school because I forgot to write 4 letters in the margin of a 600-page document would have been pretty unfortunate. So it's something that I focus on out of that, is how do I focus on the details and stay detail oriented, but also make sure you don't lose sight of the big picture, because you can get sucked down into the details. And then maybe another failure was when I went to get out of the military. I was interviewing to be an investment banker. And I won't say the name of the bank, but I did 16 interviews with this bank, a big, prestigious bulge bracket investment bank. 16 interviews. I eventually flew out to New York City, did a couple in-person interviews, and after 16 interviews, I ended up not getting a job offer of any sort there. But what I learned from that is I just kept my head down and kept working hard. And about 2 months later, I ended up getting a job offer at Goldman Sachs, which was a better outcome anyways. So I just didn't give up.
Amazing, and that kind of links into the next part. I mean, look, you've got countless sort of achievements and accolades, and some of which, especially touching on the Jabara Award back in 2016. These are things that people can only kind of dream of achieving across their lifespan. So, what would you consider, I guess, career to date, life to date, as your biggest achievement so far?
Yeah, professionally, I would say it's really not even documented. The Jabara Award is actually a culmination of, it's kind of there's 3 things that really fed into that. One thing is I flew the first mission for the United States into the country, first combat mission for the United States into Syria. And then I received this award called the Distinguished Flying Cross for helping to rescue 41 Americans in Afghanistan. And everybody survived. But the third one, which is not very known, is there was a refugee crisis in northern Iraq in a mountain called Mount Sinjar in 2014, and there was about tens of thousands of Yazidi refugees that were stranded on this mountain in northern Iraq. They're stranded there because they were being attacked by ISIS, and I was one of the fighter pilots there that helped secure supplies and airdrops to get them food and water. And then we helped create a corridor, protected them as we helped get them out of northern Iraq into Turkey. And so I think I don't really know. The thing says that we helped rescue over 10,000 Yazidi refugees, and with that, I didn't. It was purely saving people, and that was very, very meaningful to me. It's something that I'm very proud of.
Yeah, absolutely. That's incredible. And anybody that's kind of listening to this, I would definitely give that a Google in terms of the mission where you say 41 troops. I've seen it on YouTube, and it's one thing actually watching it in a movie, but when you see it's real life, it's incredibly profound and inspirational. So thanks for sharing that. And outside of that, Matt, where do you see both Voyager and Space for Humanity evolving over the next 5 years? Where do you want them to be for the next 5 years?
Yeah, I mean, with Space for Humanity, within the next 5 years, we certainly will have done multiple missions with Space for Humanity, multiple crewed missions for our citizen astronauts, which is kind of over the next 5 years, call it the next phase. Some are probably in the next couple years, but towards the back half of that 5 years is really what impact has that made in their local communities or in the region or on society, and how do we quantify that? What and I don't know, like, what, fast forward even greater than 5 years, fast forward 20, 30 years around the world, what happens with the conscious shift of humanity if we've gone from putting 600 people in the history of the world into space to 10,000 or 50,000 or more folks around the world into space? What does that mean? I mean, what if you put the leaders of Ukraine and Russia on a space flight together? Like, how would that change how they interact? Something like that. I don't know. But what happens to the conscious shift of humans as we start to become really a post-terrestrial or interplanetary species? And then on Voyager, our plan here over the next 5 to 10 years is we want to be prime capable, but built on the fundamental foundation of new space, innovation, and entrepreneurship. So what prime capable means is, how do we have solid, proven capabilities that when you go up to space, the technology works, it's reliable, it's innovative, but yet it didn't take, all of the overhead and bureaucracy of a big, huge, giant traditional, aerospace company to generate? How do we become highly capable, but also not lose that innovative entrepreneurial spirit as we continue to grow?
Absolutely incredible. And over the years, whether that's in life, in your military career, or in your business career, there's lots of, especially with the sort of the internet age, there's a lot of maybe misinformation, different advice flying around social media, etc. So over your career life, what would you say is the best and the worst advice you've been given so far?
Best and the worst advice I've ever been given. The best advice would probably be from my father, who he was in the military, and then he was a government employee his whole life. He was a prison warden, actually. And when I was talking to him about, hey, like, should I quit Goldman Sachs private equity investment team to start Voyager, the space company? It's high risk. What do you think? And his advice was, like, you'll always be able to find a job, right? I think a lot of people over allocate risk when they start a company. They have this envision that they're going to be, if they fail, they're going to be living under a bridge or something. It might be a tumultuous couple months, but you can always go find a job, right? As long as you're a hard worker. So he's like, take a risk, like go build something, and bet on yourself and build it for yourself. So that was kind of a big vote in the positive direction to quit this job that seemed to be a job that a lot of folks, at least in the finance world, wanted to have. And that was great advice. And then the worst advice was probably from a whole bunch of people in the military, actually, that told me to never move to New York City, and don't work on Wall Street, and go work at a traditional aerospace company as a former fighter pilot, go get a job at Boeing or Lockheed or something to go leverage that. And it's because that was a safe choice. It's the known quantity. And, but if I had listened to all of them, I literally sold almost everything we had. I sold both of our cars. We sold almost all of our furniture. And my wife and I moved up to New York City with a young child, and she was pregnant, and 2 dogs. And we got there and we went to a 950 square foot apartment with no vehicles. And when my wife went into labor with my second daughter, we had to actually get on our phones and request an Uber to take her to the hospital because we didn't have a car. But it was great. It was a great place to be. Working at Goldman Sachs was a great experience. And if I had just taken the safe route, I never would have gotten that valuation, that company, that business to business exposure that I think is very, very incredibly valuable for what we're doing at Voyager today. So.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that kind of, in terms of going a different route, as you mentioned, going to Wall Street as opposed to the conventional pathway to one of the primes, so that kind of leads on to the next thing. And it does tie in with the stuff we spoke about earlier around kind of making space accessible for everybody. But it starts with those people, the younger generation, the men, the women, the kids, trying to identify how they go about it, how they actually navigate themselves to even think about entering the space sector. So over the years and the stuff you've done, what would you say was the kind of the best resources that you've identified and utilized over the years, whether it be courses or programs or mentors that kind of helped you segue into the space sector?
Yeah, I would say probably 2 things come to mind. One is really just understanding that these space companies, at the end of the day, they're really not that much different than any other company. Whether you work at a paper mill or you work at a tech company in Silicon Valley at Google, or you work in finance, or you're a consultant, or any company in between, because there's the product that the company produces, which might be different, right? Like maybe Google is search software or whatever part you're in. Or there's like, hey, we're a paper mill, we print newspapers, or we produce pharmaceutical, we produce some sort of drugs. In space, we produce whatever, a satellite or something. Okay, that's the product, right? But separate of that product and all the other layers around that product, a lot of these companies are actually the exact same. You need human resources, you need finance, you need operations, you need accounting, you need supply chain, you need public relations, you need marketing, right? So these are things that you don't have to go to MIT and major in astronautical engineering to work at a space company. You might need that to work on that specific satellite project, but a satellite is not a business plan. A satellite doesn't make money on its own. You need a whole team of people. You need business development, you need sales. So I think the first thing is for folks to realize that if they want to get into the space sector, just think about, well, if what I'm doing at my company, would it be required at any other company? I think that the short answer is like 95% of the time is yes. We need marketing, we need PR, we need all these kinds of things that aren't technical. So kind of open up the aperture that it's not just a bunch of engineers building things. The second thing I would say is you said mentorship. I would say that, or something else is just in-person networking. But I don't think that's even unique to the space sector. I mean, how I got my job offers in New York City in finance or other places, you still go through the formal process, but it's much easier if you know somebody on the other side of that application resume portal that can pull you through that process. So, if you want to work in Google, at Google, yeah, the HR person is going to review your resume among all the other 1,000 resumes they get. But if you want to work in a certain division, in a certain office, in a certain location with a certain peer set of people, go find those people, find some commonality, reach out to them on LinkedIn or find a warm introduction, and just learn from them. A, you might figure out that you actually don't want to work with those people or you don't like what they're doing. But B, if you hit it off and you form a relationship, when you do submit that application, it doesn't get blocked by the HR person or by some like AI resume reader. That person can take your resume, pull it through that portal, and drop it on the decision maker's desk. Say, hey, take a look at this guy or this girl, because they're really interested. So I would say mentorship or probably networking, and I would even be more precise to say targeted networking, and that will get you into the space sector as well.
Absolutely, for sure. Well, that was going to be, every episode now we like to kind of close out to share one final question, and a couple of things you mentioned there already. And by the way, I just want to say that we're incredibly grateful for your time today. This has been incredible to speak to you and learn about everything. So I really, really appreciate it. And the final question from us is definitely tying on to that, is what advice would you give for anyone looking to actually get into the space sector? It's obviously evolved massively over the last 5 to 10 years. I think commercial space is becoming more and more often. And this is for everyone. This is, again, goes to the whole purpose of this podcast is the whole thing of demystifying the space sector and making it accessible to everyone. So not just engineers, whether they're business developers, like you just mentioned, or a lawyer or a physicist, whatever it is, people that just haven't even given it a thought because maybe they think it's just too far beyond their reach. What advice would you have for those people that are looking to get into the space sector in 2022 or beyond?
I think probably a couple things. So to me, the space sector, it's like the internet of the 1990s. I've said this a couple other places where back in the 90s, everyone knew the internet was here, but no one had any idea how it was going to change society. And we fast forward 30 years and internet's changed the way the world operates completely. No one would have, entire economies have popped up around the internet, like the sharing economy, for example. To me, if folks wish they could have gone back in time and moved to San Francisco in 1995 and been in Silicon Valley in the tech industry from 95 to 2010 or 2015, well, you have another chance to do that because that's happening right now. And that's the new space sector. This is the equivalent of the 90s of the internet. Everyone knows the space sector is here, but no one has any idea how it's going to change the world over the next 20, 30 years, but it's going to change society. So number one is take a risk, and it's not even that much of a risk, but just pivot and be like, what, this is the equivalent of I had got involved in the tech sector and software, 25, 30 years ago. The same thing is happening right now. It's fun. It's an adventure. And it's kind of a journey into the unknown, and you don't know exactly where it's going to lead, but it's going to do something big. And anyone who says they know what space is going to look like in 30 years, they're wrong. And then the second thing, more on a smaller, or call it a tactical level, just to go back is, say, hey, how do I get into the space sector? That's too broad of a question for someone looking to get a job there. It's like, it's equivalent of saying, hey, I want to join the military. Like, okay, well, good. What branch of the military? Oh, the Air Force. Okay, well, what do you want to do in the Air Force? Do you want to be a intelligence or supply chain or a fighter pilot or a pilot? Yeah, I want to be a pilot. Well, what kind of pilot? A fighter pilot. What kind of plane? A fighter jet. Which kind? F-15. You got to narrow it down, right? And you don't have to know all the answers right now, but if you say, hey, I want to get into the space sector, take it at least 2 or 3 levels deep just to get in, and then you can kind of fine tune it from there. So, hey, I want to get in the space sector. What's my expertise? I majored in graphic design at a local community college. Okay, so what does that mean? I probably the next level is I probably want to be in marketing or PR. Okay, so I want to be a marketing or PR person within a space company. Okay, well, what do I find interesting? I don't like satellites. I don't like space stations, but I really like rockets. Okay, so now I want to be marketing or PR in the space sector at a rocket company. Okay, there's all these rocket companies. What region of the world or country am I willing to live in? And then go reach out to not just the HR there, but the people that find out, is there a marketing or PR person that's actually looking to hire someone at Rocket Lab or Astra or pick your launch company? that can pull you through that process. That's actually the marketer that's there, that's looking for, a second set of hands. So that's kind of how I would kind of recommend approaching it.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thanks ever so much for that. I think, taking the initiative, but also actually really thinking about what you're doing, being specific, and like you mentioned earlier, more targeted in their approach as opposed to just go for it. So, no, thanks ever so much. Well, look, Matt, thanks ever so much for your time today. Really, really appreciate it. It's been amazing to have you on the show and share your story from Colorado to the Space Force to Wall Street to space. So it's been an incredible journey. So no, thanks ever so much for giving us your time today, and we really, really appreciate it.
No, of course. Thank you, Rich, for having me on. It's a pleasure.
Awesome. All right. Well, till next time. Thanks ever so much, Matt. Appreciate it.
Cheers. Have a good day.
Take care. Cheers. Bye.